Hey guys, thanks for being here. I have a new single that just dropped called Chrysalis, and today I want to show you how I made the beat for it. So let's dive into that. So the first thing that was a little different about this song is instead of just digging around in the actual crates for like vinyl and then using my USB vinyl recorder to, manually get a bunch of samples and then try to make them seem not like so old and dusty through manual procedures. This time I decided to try a service called Tracklib. I'm sure everybody has heard of it. I'd heard of it too, but I kind of had the impression that it was one of those like producer cheats. I don't know, like one of those things where you can get like complete loops that are like already produced. They have a ton of reverb. They're all wet. And, there's nothing wrong with using those unless like you are a producer. If you're a producer, that's your whole thing and you are using loops only, there's a problem. I mean, it's what you do, so do it. But if you're just an artist and you just need a beat and it's more of like a means to an end, you need a beat, you can't afford an exclusive license. I mean, like who can afford that? And so you make one out of loops. I think it's not what I find fulfilling, but if that's your thing and you're an artist, that's totally fine. But for me, I prefer to have my hands in every part of a song that I'm making. I mean, obviously the writing is something that I would never, ever let anyone else touch. But, from the writing to the concept, even the album art, all the visuals, any part of the song, including the beat, I like to be the one to be micromanaging every detail of it. And that's just kind of how I am. But I thought that Tracklib might be one of those services where you just basically get these completed polished loops and you just drop it in the project, and there's 4 of them. There's drums and then there's leads and then there's like whatever, like effects, and that's it, and that's your whole track. Just drums, bass, harmony, lead. And I didn't want anything to do with that, but I decided to just see what it was about. And then I realized that it's what I'm already doing. What I've been doing is going to the dollar store and getting these random vinyl records, sort of rhythm roulette style, just coming home with them, these random things, and just spending hours picking through them and getting a couple beats here, a couple beats there, getting a little tiny 4-bar loop out of a lot of hours of labor and effort. Tracklib is kind of the same thing, except it's not a physical record store, it's a digital one. And, the crates are still dusty, and I liked that. So I decided to go ahead and go through it and see if I found something that kind of inspired me. It was basically like a bigger dollar bin at a better record store. I found a lot of cool stuff. I actually really liked the service because it didn't take the work out of it. I don't know if that's a selling point as far as everyone is concerned, but for me, that was a huge selling point for Tracklib. Anyways, so I ended up going with a beat called Shark Moves. I think originally this song is by a group called Pegasus, but I'm not totally sure because on Tracklib, it says it's by Frank Dukes, who is actually just the person that owns the rights to the song, not the artist who created it. So I'm not 100% sure if it's Pegasus or not, but I think that it is, because I think that the bass from this track is the one that Dr. Dre sampled for his song Deeper. I think it's Deeper. Is it Deeper Impact or? Okay, I'm gonna put it here. Anyway, so maybe it was a Deep Purple? Deep Cover? Deep something. It was Deep something. Very old track. But anyway, I think that this is the same record. It's just, he just took a tiny piece of one element and then totally flipped it. So it's not going to be necessarily recognizable. But anyways, I'm pretty sure that this is the Pegasus Shark Moves, because Pegasus is the one that Dre sampled. I think it's the same one. The original song is in the key of B flat minor. I ended up putting mine in F minor, but it's a really cool arrangement. I'm gonna play you guys the song, not in full. I'll do that at the end, but I'm gonna play you a part of it from the intro now, so you can hear the whole composition, and then we'll kind of break down how I got it there. It took a lot. I'm just not the type to just drop a loop in and call it. So, all right, let's see how this sounds. System overload. Wonderful. Okay. Even a really good Mac, it doesn't matter. It's just, it overloads the instant things get interesting. So that was through most of verse 1. So you get the idea. And most of what you heard, or probably most of what you were paying attention to, isn't actually the Tracklib sample at all. It's the drums, which I always do from scratch, and they're pretty complex. And the rest were the keys, which sounds sort of more like bells, but it's just piano MIDI. So I will break that down in a little bit. But first, let's take a look at what it was like getting on Tracklib for the first time and just finding the sample. So I'll play a short video from my process. I recorded these while I was making the beat so that I could kind of remember what I did when it came time to do these videos. So it's the shark moves. That became part of my outro. So it's cool because on Tracklib you can actually just select like a 2-bar loop or a 4-bar loop, and it lets you kind of decide how you want to break it up. You can even just kind of randomly select and then download just that piece, which is helpful because a lot of times when I'm sampling from vinyl, what I end up doing is recording a whole long piece of a song, and then I have to go in and I have to chop it up. And once I chop it up, I have to figure out like, okay, do I want to make this a different key? Do I need to change the tempo? And it becomes this whole like labor-intensive process where I feel like I lose a lot of those like little genius moments from the original sample, but I lose it because there's too much there to go through. So this is just maybe a better workflow. So what I'm doing here is basically just selecting what part of this particular sample that I want to pull into the project. And when I'm ready, I just hit download, and then I can actually drag it in like that. It's not going to be necessarily the tempo or the key of my project unless I've gone looking for a specific song with a specific key and tempo. But we'll get to how to make the sample fit whatever your project is set to in a little bit. This part right here, I ended up using this in this part called the dramatic sequence. That's what I call it anyway. It's this like little interlude in my beat. It was so crunchy. I had nightmares about like it coming out as just static and like not being able to actually hear any melodic elements. It was just like static. I had literal nightmares about that. But in the end, a little bit of processing, it came out really good. Okay, so basically what you just saw was me going through Tracklib and, downloading what would eventually become the sort of staple piece in my beat. In the end, I changed a lot about it, but I feel like that's kind of, it's kind of important. If you're taking a sample and you're just dropping it in, I'm going to sort of copy and paste. And, I try not to be judgmental about it because there's a lot of reasons why that might be the right move for some people. But for me, I would feel guilty, and I also wouldn't really get much out of it. So I always make sure that I really flip a sample. Like I change it significantly enough that it is, I've made it my own, but not so significantly that it's sort of pointless to have liked it to begin with. Because if you flip a sample to the point that it's so completely different from the original that it's like not even remotely related anymore, it's sort of like, well, if that's the sample you picked because that's the part you liked, I mean, you could have done that much editing with literally anything. So I try to flip it, but not completely topsy-turvy it, I guess we'll say that. So this is, once I've got the samples I like and I put them in the project, I'm basically just working with them a little. Those are all the little stems that I took from Tracklib. They're just kind of just in the project. I'm going through them, figuring out what I like, what I think should be, part of the song, and what maybe I just don't need. So you're gonna hear dissonance. Do you hear that? That's because I had not transposed that one green stem to the same key as the rest that I had already started transposing. So that's why key is so important. It's so important to key everything and to make sure you're in key for your project, because dissonance is only good when it's done on purpose. And trust me, you'll hear the difference as soon as you compare a piece that's in key and a piece that isn't. So right here, I'm just taking all these samples, which are not quite the same tempo as my project, as 132, and I am setting them to the nearest bar. Basically, I'm time stretching them. And you do that by going to Edit, Time Stretch, and Time Stretch to nearest bar if you're working in Logic Pro. And if you're just a little bit off from the grid line, it's a good way to get it quickly to that exact point of fitting your tempo. If you're really far off, you're going to need to do some more complicated stuff or change your project tempo. So I'm bothered by the last two notes in that top purple bass riff. So what you're seeing me do here is try and figure out how to get rid of them. So I got rid of the ones on the yellow region first because they were playing the same notes. That yellow region is a bass, isolated. And I didn't realize how much I talk to myself when I'm working until I watched back these videos. At the end of that one, I'm all like, perfect. So I mean, it was. I love that feeling when you finally get it there. It's so satisfying. All right. So the next thing that we're going to do is watch this video, which is where I'm actually keying these samples to be in the key that I want them to be in. But I don't know what key I want them to be in yet because I don't have anything else in my project at that point. I haven't played any other instruments or added any other elements. It's just these samples. So I don't want to keep them at the original key because it will be too much like the original song, and I want to make it something new. But I also don't want to lose that vibe about it that I liked initially. And changing the key of your song can dramatically change the mood or almost like the personality of the song that you're composing. It makes an enormous difference. Maybe the biggest decision you'll make when you are making a beat from scratch is what key that end beat is going to be in. Is the song that you make going to be in F minor or G sharp major or D major, E flat minor? What is your final beat going to sound like? That's determined so much by the key you pick initially. Because remember, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, every single thing that you put in that project is going to be in that key. So it's going to really determine how everything literally plays out from there. So it's really important to make the decision about what key to put your beat in. It's important to make that decision consciously and deliberately because every song key has its own mood and its own sort of personality. So, the song that you end up making as you build on it is going to be largely defined by that one choice. And it's a choice you have to make in the beginning of your project because, you can't just be throwing stuff in there that doesn't match in key or everything will sound dissonant and you'll never know if something's good or not. So as I am putting these samples in, once I get them time stretched to be the right length, because I knew I wanted a mid-tempo on this song. So I figured 132, it's not too slow. It's not like, like 50 BPM when it's half times, but it's also not too fast. At that tempo, you're kind of in a situation where you cannot easily double time something as far as rapping goes, but you also can't really easily half time something because that would be very slow. It's good and bad. In some cases, it's good because it keeps you locked into one defined flow pattern for your rapping or even for the grooves of your different instrumental elements because you can't easily double time it or half time it. It also can create some interesting flows because what somebody would tend to do if they felt like 132 was too slow of a pocket, since they can't double time that speed, they would probably start doing triplets, like eighth note triplets. And that can sound really cool. It's a very sort of Lil Wayne, J. Cole kind of flow. So 132 can really put the rapper that gets on the beat, in this case, also me, it can really put them in an interesting situation where they're forced to either stay in a mid-tempo pocket, or if they want to break out of that, they have to sort of do these interesting little triplet flows. So I wanted to try a mid-tempo beat. I've done the really fast, the 166. I've done the 2000s era slow, like in the 90 range, which I really love. I wish that beats were still in like the 90 range, like 96. That BPM is like, I love it. I love it. It's enough space for all the rhymes you want to do. Everything, vowels get to stretch in this really pleasant way. Anyway, I'm not going to go off on a whole tirade about that, but in this case, I decided to just stick myself in a mid-tempo bracket that would allow me to do some more interesting and faster drum elements. Trap is really heavily based on the need to double time those hats. So I wanted to have hats that were going faster than they would at like 90. So that's why I picked 132. Once I got all of my samples stretched to that length, the next thing I needed to do was decide what key I wanted to transpose them to. So like I said, we started out in B flat minor or A sharp minor. They're enharmonically the same. And then I'm going to go through here in this video and I'm going to start transposing up and down and see what sounds good to me. And you'll notice that each time I transpose a semitone, which changes the key of the song, everything feels a little different, like it's almost like a different mood. So what I'm really doing is I'm deciding what kind of vibe am I trying to create. And so that's why I say this initial decision you make about song key is so important and just should not be done lightly. Please don't leave your project in the key of C and default 120. Don't do that to yourself. Like, I don't care if you're not a producer, you're just an artist that needs to make a beat. Don't do that to yourself. That's just a terrible box to be in. And 120 is the most trash tempo in my humble opinion. Okay, so let's take a look and see how I'm doing this. I'm using a plugin called AutoKey. It's by Antares, the makers of Autotune. There are other ways to do this, like mixing key works the same way. Neither are free, but I believe both have a subscription model. You can always do the subscription and pay monthly for a whole package of Antares products, including AutoKey. AutoKey is just the most essential plugin for the early stages of making a beat. But if you don't have access to either of those tools, you can always go to TuneBat, go to the settings menu, and you can like upload or just drop your beat into that window and it will tell you the key and the BPM, but it's not a live readout. So you can't like transpose up and then see what the new key is live. You would have to bounce out that transposed stem, drop it into Tracklib, let it analyze it, go back into your project, transpose up or down again to see if you like a different key. And then you'd have to bounce that. Then you'd have to take that bounce file and you'd have to put that back into TuneBat. And yeah, it just would get time consuming. So I suggest trying to get access to AutoKey if you can. So let's see what it looks like to use that. And just, yeah, I would say pay attention to kind of how the mood of the song shifts as I transpose up and down. Okay, so this is actually what I ended up with. It says these are the samples from Tracklib at -5 semitones, putting it in F minor. But before I decided on that, I tried all these. This is -7. And that's in the key of E flat minor. So just -2 semitones makes a big difference. That's -3. See, this would have been a different song. So that's in D major. I didn't want a major key though, because it can tend to be a little happy. It's -2. So that's G sharp minor. I kind of liked that one. I almost went with it. It's -1. So we're going up. And that's an E major, but again, I wanted to avoid major keys for this song. It was already going to be mid-tempo. I didn't want it to end up being like a pop kind of thing. So we're going up now. This is +1. So that's in B minor. I liked this one too, but it was very close to the original song key, so I felt like I shouldn't go with it. This is +2 semitones. And now it's in C minor. C minor is always a solid, safe choice. This is +3. And that's C sharp minor. If you're noticing a pattern here, good for you, because that's how music theory works. So I liked F minor the most in the end. That was -5. So it's just important to make sure that you're choosing your song key, deliberately. Like, it's going to really inform the entire creative process. So, don't leave it at just like the default, and don't pick it just randomly. There are actually resources online that show you social consensus on the mood of every song key. They did like a study, a massive study a while back that polled a bunch of people and asked them, like, what does this key make you think of? And they'd play like the scale or a song in that key, and everyone would weigh in. They'd say, this makes me think of like war or marching. And then for another key, they might say, this makes me think of longing or sadness or love. And they basically just took all of that sample data and tried to figure out, like, where is there commonality? And then they put that information up, and now it's become infographics and very accessible forms of that data. So you can check that out. I'll try to link that somewhere for you guys to look at. Okay, so the next thing that you want to do after you have set your project tempo, you've set your song key, now you have some real direction. Now you know sort of the boundaries around what you can and can't play or can and can't add to the project, because every song key has a defined set of notes associated with it, like notes on a piano, let's say.
A little music 101. Today I want to talk about scales. Now, a lot of people are quite scared of scales when they first start playing music because they feel like they're exercises and they're very difficult to figure all of them out because there's so many of them. But the way you need to think of scales is not as exercises, but as portals and foundations to creating musical worlds. The most basic scale that a lot of people know, and you may even know it without knowing music at all, sounds something like this. That's the major scale. So what is it? It's just a collection of notes, right? It's a specific collection of notes that gives you a specific sound. If I wanted to change some notes and create a slightly different mood in my scale, I could make something that sounded more like this. In that case, I just played the C minor scale, and that gives us a bit of a darker sound. Now, scales can get as wild and exotic as you can think of.
So when you play a scale, that's 7 or 8, depending on how you want to look at it, 7 whole steps that are unique to that one key. Although, not to get too technical, but if you're playing like a major key, there's always going to be a relative minor, which uses the same notes, but in a different order. It's not really important to know all that. I mean, unless you're, really getting into music theory. What you need to know just to work as a producer or as an artist that wants to make their own beats is just that when you pick your song key, there is a specific set of notes that you can play and the rest you can't. If you play notes that are not in that scale, you are going to be out of key. When you do that on purpose, ironically, it's called an accidental, and it can have an incredibly cool effect. But don't dive into making creative mistakes until you've learned how to, creatively do things correctly. That's my advice. So we're going to stick to the song key and to the notes that are within that key. And I recommend you do the same unless there's a really good specific reason not to. So people that are into jazz might be like, oh, that's,
Check it out. I don't know what key. I don't have perfect pitch, but I don't care. Because you're not going to dance to the key, right? You don't dance because it's in the key. You dance to the groove. So I'm going to do my best to play the wrong note, but I'm going to make it groove. I start here. So no matter what note I play, right? That's wrong. That's right. It took me one note to know where I was, but you don't care. Listen, listen, listen. Listen. These are all the notes. You tell me which one is wrong. All the notes are right. But it's the context that makes it right, not the pitch.
But, we're not making jazz, so let's just stick to the key. All right, so let's watch this next video. So in this one, I'm checking my work, making sure that these did indeed get all keyed to F minor. Notice how different it sounds from the original. But still the same, so it maintained the vibe, it just flipped it a little. Okay, so the next thing that I always do is I fine tune the samples. So even when they are the length that they're supposed to be, they fit the bar, and they are the key that you've decided you want to use for your beat, there's always something about an actual sample, about those actual stems that isn't working. At least in my experience, I find that there's one note that I don't want, or sometimes I just want one note. And occasionally when you do time stretch a sample, especially if you're trying to make it longer than, or rather slower than the original was, you're going to find that sometimes some notes just don't really transition well to a slower BPM. Faster tends to work a little better unless you're doing an extreme tempo change. But in the end, what I really didn't like about the stems that I chose was just one note on the bass and one note on the, I guess you can call it the master sample. I took it from the entire song Shark Moves. But I just ended up using a few licks from it. So let's watch this video on me fine-tuning samples, and you can kind of see what my process is. So that one note, it just felt a little off. So basically I time stretched it, but instead of using the time stretch function, I just went ahead and used flex. Handy, it's in Logic, but most DAWs have a version of this. Then I use crossfades to kind of create a smoother transition. And then again, I decided to move that last note from the yellow sequence. So you're going to notice it doesn't really line up to that last grid line, but it doesn't matter because it's just like an underlayer. So now I've created a loop. That purple loop is created from two pieces of the same song, but in two totally different sections. And I just blended them together by flexing that last bass note to be just a little longer. And then I took that and I just joined it, bounced it in place with the one above it, so that there was like a blend of two notes that were happening at the same time. And then I used a crossfade to finesse that. Okay, so let's talk about one more thing that's preliminary to actually really getting into making the beat. After I get my samples in place, the next thing I always want to do is put my own spin on the beat by playing out a few things on the MIDI keyboard. I don't think I've ever made a beat where I didn't play a significant portion of it. It just helps me to feel like I've really put my own effort into the composition as opposed to just taking the genius of others and running with it. So if I can't add to it, I don't use it. So, adding to something that's already a fully composed, mastered song is difficult, but it can also be really inspiring. The first thing I do is I just set up a new instrument track and I start playing around on the keyboard to see what sounds good with what I'm playing, which is, of course, the stems that I have now, the samples that I've now processed and adjusted, and they're in the right key and they're the right length, and I've made any little fine-tuning adjustments I needed to make them all feel fluid and good. Then I start playing basically like harmonies to it. But I have 5 things that I do before I ever start recording on an instrument track. So let's watch this video and I'll show you what those are. So, first thing is know your song key and know what that means. You can see on the left side of the screen, that's a list of different song keys. I'll put that here. Then I practice the scale, because if you're going to be playing, you need to be able to play it without thinking about it. And then I riff a while. So I'm not trying to play anything usable here. I'm just getting a feel for what this key sounds like. That's dissonance. That's what happens when you play a key that's outside of the song key, when you play a note that's outside the song key. So if you heard that sour element to it, then you've got a good ear. Okay, and then I start out with a simple piano MIDI. Don't use some crazy wah bass or some sort of weird bell. Just use something standard so you can really hear what you're laying out. And I use the velocity processor when I record. That's important because, well, at least for me, when I'm playing on the MIDI keyboard, I have an Akai, and when I play on it, if one of the notes that I've played while recording is kind of dim or it's softer than the rest, it feels to me almost like I messed up. And it can really pull me out of what I'm doing. And when that record button has been hit and you're playing it live, you definitely don't want to be pulled out of it for even a minute for any reason. So, in Logic, there is a thing you can add. It's above the bus channel on any track that's an instrument track. And it has a set of different things that you can do to create a different playing environment for MIDI recording. And I always turn on velocity processor and then I set it to max, because that's going to make all of the notes sound like they're the same volume or the same intensity. So it's like you hit every key the exact same amount of hard. You're just hitting each one exactly the same. There's never any softness to any of them. Now, for the final version of the MIDI I end up recording, I don't want every note to be the exact same velocity most of the time. But I find it's easier to go in later and adjust the velocity manually to create the more human version of keystrokes than it is to actually just assume that that's going to come out perfectly live. So I turn velocity to max, and that means all of my MIDI notes are going to be red. But then I go in and I turn down the velocity on specific notes to give it a sort of lighter touch where I want it. So I will actually play again this part of the video so you can hear a velocity processor on and off. And that's the last thing that I do before I start recording MIDI, is I just make sure my velocity processor is on. So that's off. That's on. So it helps. It's a good trick, I think. What I always do next is I just spend a little bit of time riffing, like I said, and trying to find different grooves with the metronome on. I like to know where I can pocket my notes before I start recording, because I want to know if I can get away with 16th notes or even 32nd notes. Can I do 8th triplets, or does that sound weird? It's going to be different at every tempo, and it's probably going to be different for every person depending on preference. So best thing you can do is to start just playing quarter notes and then play 8th notes and then see if you can fit in any 8th triplets or 16ths. And you're not recording, so if your tempo gets a little off, it's not a big deal. It'll warm you up, and also it creates a sort of imaginative approach to how can I make a groove here? What grooves feel good at this tempo and with the other instruments I have in place? So that's what this looks like. So just quarter notes. You could hear me counting. So now I'm working on like 8th triplets or just 16th notes to see if I like the groove. This is just about pacing, not about the note I'm playing. I just picked a note and just spelled out the rhythm. But that note wasn't in the key, so you can hear me saying oops. So that last note was also not in the key, so I had to remind myself what the scale was, which is what I'm doing here. You don't have to memorize each scale. It's good if you can, but if you can't, just get a reference chart like I have, and just make sure that you're looking at it every now and then while you're actually playing out something. See, or that will happen. Okay, so as you can see, I have everything transposed, arranged, and cut up the way I want it. I have felt out my grooves, so I'm basically now ready to start trying to play something I actually want to use. Before I was just riffing to get a feel for the groove and for the mood of the actual key and the song as it stands now. So once I'm done riffing, and like sometimes I can spend a whole day on that, not because it's like especially fun, but more just because I don't feel that inspiration yet. Like I know exactly what should go here. So I'll just riff until I get there. And it's kind of one of those processes that, for me anyway, can't really be rushed. You have to just sort of sit with it and just be okay with not feeling like you know what to do yet for a while sometimes. And sometimes it comes right away. It just really depends. I will tell you, with this song, something kind of magical happened. So what happened between the video you just saw and the one you're about to watch is I realized exactly what I wanted to play, and I decided I was going to play it. I don't know if this is true for you guys, but I have a feeling it probably is. I can play out something and it can sound genius, and I can play it a dozen times and it sounds perfect. It gets better and better. And the second I hit that record button, something crazy happens, and I'm like all thumbs, and I'm hitting the wrong keys, and I'm messing up the rhythm, and I'm recording past the loop and then recording over the beginning of the Midi, and just, it's a mess. And that's just the curse of the record button. But this is the only time this ever happened to me, and probably the last time it'll ever happen to me. I hit the record button and I played out like 8 bars, maybe 16, perfectly. I made some minor adjustments, like the kind you have to zoom in to see, but it was basically perfect, and that's never happened before. It will probably never happen again. So after I had that sort of blessed recording of this piano sequence, I did not want to just hit the quantize button and call it a day, because I felt like that somehow undid the kind of magical moment where the stars aligned and I was able to just play it with record on. I even stopped it before the loop went back around to the beginning. Anyway, so I was like, I'm not trying to completely dehumanize it with a quantize function. But at the same time, if a note stuck out to me that was ever so slightly off, I needed to go in and make an adjustment to that. And of course, I did need to adjust the velocity on some of these notes so it wasn't all just the exact same volume and intensity, because that will never sound natural unless you're really going for that kind of style. You want a variation of velocity. In Logic, I like to think of it as making it look like a handful of Skittles, like it should be like reds and greens and yellows and oranges, and so that's a good velocity mix. If it's all red, unless you're going for specifically that sort of like consistent intensity, you might want to do some adjustments there. So after recording that sort of like blessed 16 bars, I went ahead and made micro adjustments for a while. So we'll see what that looks like. So after I did this, I went back and undid it, because I was moving it to be slightly more aligned with the 16th grid lines, and then realized that I wasn't really doing 16th notes the whole time, and that didn't sound right. So this is me fine-tuning it from there. So I call this micro editing. It's not for everyone. I don't know if you can tell, this is actually sped up like 600 times, literally. So this was a lot of work. Felt like it went fast though. I know that everyone is really into these. Check out the beat I made in 60 seconds.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And that's cool and all, but look, if you can make a really good beat in a minute, imagine what you can do if you spent an hour on it or a day. You could be like Mozart if you spent a week. If you can make a good beat in 60 seconds, I don't think you should focus so much on how fast you can do it or how efficiently even. Just how proud of it are you when you're done. That's what you should focus on. A million micro adjustments later, this is what we have. Now, I'm actually really good with this. Okay, so now I'm making those velocity adjustments that we talked about. See how it kind of looks like a handful of Skittles? That's what you want to aim for. Notice how it sounds more natural again. And it has some emotion to it that was probably there when I played it, but just didn't come through because velocity processor was set to max. So this is kind of just a, to taste type of thing. Just do it to taste. There's no rules that will be useful more than, once. It's always specific to what you're doing in that moment. So, okay, this is another thing that I wanted to show everyone that I did for this beat. I bet a lot of you don't even know you can do this. And, I'm not one of those like solid hack type of creators, but I think that it's a solid hack. This is creating a MIDI file from pitch data. What that means is if I went on Tracklib and I got, say, a bass line and it was really good, but it was old and crackly, and I was like, that's not going to work in my polished Drake type beat or whatever. I don't really make those, but lots of people do. So anyway, so if I'd had that nasty, old, crackly, dusty vinyl sample and I wanted that melody, but I don't want that actual WAV file version of it, there is an easy way to make that audio track into a MIDI track. And then you can assign any instrument you want to it. And you can even edit it like regular MIDI. It's just a regular MIDI track at that point. And it's really cool. I don't know if you can do this in other DAWs, but you can do it in Logic, which is where I make beats. Even though I do all of my tracking and mixing and mastering in Pro Tools, Logic is where I make beats. So I know you can do it here, and I'm going to show you how in this video. Let's take a look. So this is after I have taken the sample from Tracklib, and I have created pitch data from it by turning on Flex, first of all, and then you go to this menu in the track editor, and you just say, Analyze Pitch Data for Flex editing. And then once that's done, you click that right there, which is just create MIDI from pitch data. And then this little yellow version of the WAV file will pop up and you'll see the pitch data. Now that's not MIDI yet, that's pitch data. So then you can go right click it, go to a menu, and you can just say create MIDI from pitch data. Now the default instrument that's assigned to it is probably that, which is trash. But don't worry, because it won't sound like that once you assign a new instrument to it, obviously, like any MIDI. So now I'm going in and I am basically just picking a synth. I love Analog Lab. It's my favorite. I'm so picky about synths. I just hate them all instantly, but Analog Lab doesn't let me down. So that's the same sample from Tracklib, which I used to create a MIDI region. And now I'm assigning a new instrument to it. So it is the same, and yet it is totally new. This can be a real win if you've got a real nasty sample that's just messed up. It's just scratchy and crackly and it's got pops and it's just too far gone to be saved. Try this. You know, I always go through so many synths, but in the end, the one I spend the longest on, I end up making a pad where you can't even hear it. Like that's for my dramatic sequence. You cannot even hear it in the song, really. And after all of the different versions that I go through, I end up going with a whirly almost every time. I just love a whirly. So once you have the MIDI, you can always duplicate it. You can make, you can make it into a bass track. Just sometimes you have to transpose, you have to drag your MIDI notes down an octave or so to make it bass if it was like in the mid register. Sometimes you got to, transpose it up by dragging those MIDI notes up an octave if you have like a bass you're trying to put a flute to or something. But it's really easy to work with this MIDI, obviously. And now you can make it anything. And here I'm just applying Soothe 2. I'm gonna actually do it in series, so meaning I'm gonna have 2 instances of it on my plugin chain. I'm also using Valhalla Supermassive, which is an incredible reverb. A lot of people like the vintage verb, and so do I. But Supermassive is great for little instrumental stems that you're going to have as like maybe an intro or an effect piece, because it gives it this huge atmosphere. It's like very sort of weekend sounding. And Soothe 2, anybody who's spent 5 seconds or more producing knows that Soothe 2 is the MVP of every single production project. I can't get enough of it. So then I spend a while micro adjusting the reverb because I'm going to automate it so that it comes on exactly the way I want it to, and I don't have to deal with decays flooding into the rest of the stems after that one little tiny segment for the intro is over. I'm really picky about that. I don't like wet signal to be everywhere unless I specifically wanted it there. So that took a while. And then what you're going to see, and I'll show you here in the project in a minute, when that was done, I actually started automating. And this is what automating looks like. Look, if you haven't automated a plugin before, start with volume or panning. Those are the easiest things to automate. They're really straightforward. Automation it shouldn't be intimidating. I know that it looks complicated, but it is not actually complicated. Just looks complicated. So, when you show off a really heavily automated project, it's going to look like, whoa, wow, that's complex, but it's actually pretty simple. So if you guys want, more tutorial on how to automate in Logic, I'd be happy to do that. Just let me know. So this is what it looks like to do that. So I'm automating an EQ on that orange line. That's so that I can have it swell in exactly the way I want it to. And speaking of Drake, his producers are a big fan of using this. It's like all his songs used to start out with that EQ, moving like that. So I've also done a volume automation. Not strictly necessary, but I find it's easier to automate the volume a lot of times than mess with the faders and like chop stuff up and put it on a new track. This is my completed, what's gonna more or less be through my first verse. And I added those violas. Love violas. Now, if you can't tell, I did that by using the MIDI I got from the pitch data from the original sample. I just adjusted it slightly. I think I took out a note and truncated a few, but then once the MIDI was the way I wanted it, I just added the Logic strings, violas to it, and you get that. It's a pretty cool trick. I wish I had known about it years ago. So I'll go ahead and show you what the automation looks like in my actual project as it stands, a finished beat, a finished song. Actually, go stream it if you haven't. It helps a lot. These are my drums. This, you can't really make this make sense visually by just showing it, but I use the DMD, the drum machine. All right, so let's just glance at these drums because, at the end of the day, it would be a lot to go through on any kind of detailed level. And I've already done a lot of videos like this where I'm showing you how I use the drum machine designer and specifically like how I sequence drums. I always find a one shot. I don't do loops just because I'm too much of a control freak to be okay with loops. So I take a one shot. I usually do some EQ or some effects to it individually. Then I drop it into the sequencer and then I pattern it out. And as you can see from the number of different drum elements, and these are just the ones that I actually went with. They're not the only ones I worked with. So this takes a while. The drums for me takes about 2 to 3 days of 8 to 9 hours of work each day. It doesn't have to take that long. I just enjoy it. So there's nothing wrong with just doing a more minimal version of this. It'll be fine. In fact, a lot of times I cause my engineer, Guy, a lot of problems because I have so many drums it can be difficult to mix. So it's okay to make a more minimal version of what you just saw. So let's take a look at some of the automation though, because I think that's really the good stuff. So as you can see right here, this is for the intro. I've automated some volume and I've automated some panning and nothing too crazy there. And then once you get over here, this is the keys, the piano sequence that I played out. And you can see I've done some volume dips, which I think actually removed the piano piece that was right here where that dip needed to happen. I guess I was trying to make it less obtrusive and then just decided to cut it. But you can see that if there's automation, it'll show up here. And if there's none, it'll just be a gray line. So then I have my choir pads, which are kind of cool. I'll zoom in and you can see that I've also used a plugin. It's actually free. It's called Spread Lite. I will try to give everyone a link to that too. I did Spread Lite for width and I automated that. And then I also did Fresh Air, which is another free plugin. And it's really good. I mean, sometimes, look, good plugins cost a lot of money. I can't say that they don't. I have most of the UAD plugins, the analog emulating ones. And I just got the new X6, which I love. So anyway, I've spent a lot of money on plugins, but at the end of the day, the ones I use most often in beat production, I'm not talking vocals, because my vocals are way too expensive if you were to add up all the plugins that I use and the cost of those plugins. But when it comes to making a beat, for some reason, the ones I tend to gravitate towards every single time, like my go-to plugins, just happen to be free ones. The major exception being Soothe 2, but it is worth every penny. They could honestly charge anything they wanted for that plugin and people would pay it. I know I would. So anyway, I've done also a little bit of reverb automation, which like I said is good for controlling things that you want to decay a certain way, because that decay knob isn't always going to be precise enough. At least not for me. And you can see this automation kind of continues. And what I really like about automating is it gives me control over the fader in a way that I can determine as slowly or as quickly as I want. And then that's locked in place. And I don't need to worry about fading out an effect that can't really be faded out unless you bounce it in place and then fade it out the track. And that doesn't even sound the same. So don't be afraid of automation. I'm telling you, it can be the difference between a workflow that stays feeling creative and fluid and one that is constantly trial and error. And also, just automating bypasses can be really helpful too, because some plugins will continue to produce noise, which they're meant to do. Like a vinyl plugin or a tape plugin is going to create that static sound. And you don't want just a bunch of random noise bleeding in that you can't even really hear, or maybe it's actually interfering with the mix, creating muddiness somewhere or harmonics that you don't want. Just bypass that plugin to be off when that one region is over. Because even if the region that you put that effect on is over, that effect, if it's a tape saturation plugin or something, it'll continue to have noise. You can always throw on an EQ and play, from some other point in the song and see if when there's no audio playing at all, it's just, the playhead's just going past where there's no regions anymore. If you still see that little tiny hair-like bumps of audio information coming through, that somewhere some plugin is creating artificial noise. And if that's not a problem for you, if it doesn't sound bad, if it's not messing with the mix, not a big deal. But if it is, or if you're just worried about it, like I'm always worried about it, then you can just automate a bypass and that works really good. So I try to do that just to keep everything clean and organized from the beginning. So yeah, as you can see, this can get a little crazy, and that's not even with the violas. I did more automation on the violas, especially here. when I was doing verse 1, I ended up adding a whole like 8 bars to it when I was writing it, and I couldn't part with it. It's the part where it's, you know, the Sean the Pelican brief. I was like, I love this. This is genius. This has to go in there, but it didn't fit. So I was like, screw it. I made the beat. I can make a change. So I went and I had to add in some bars of verse 1. And when I did that, I needed to create a whole new like instrumental part that went between the end of verse 1 and the first hook. And that was, you know, more problematic than I expected it to be, as most things are. So what I ended up doing was adding some violas here right before the hook comes in. And I just automated it to feel a little different so that I could have retro RC. Retro color is a really cool plugin. But it does what I was talking about. It adds a bunch of artificial noise, which gives it that old school analog dusty vinyl sound. But the problem is that it continues for the entirety of your project. So you just have a bunch of noise bleeding through. So I automate that to go off at a certain point here, right here, as you can see. And then right here, I have a full bypass that happens later. The reason I did both a volume automation and a bypass automation is because if I were to just leave it at a volume automation, it actually would create a pop. The bypass makes sure that it is off, like the plugin itself is bypassed, not just the fader is all the way down. Sometimes you have to do a combination of both. Sometimes bypass works great, but sometimes bypass causes a pop. You just have to kind of play with it. And then I have this bypass for the same reason. Soothe 2 I had on here because I needed it to soothe some harmonics that were created by those new plugins I added for the extra bars I put in the end of verse 1. And I didn't need Soothe 2 on for the whole time, just for that part. So I went ahead and bypassed it just because I didn't want the computer to be struggling to support all of these plugins when I wasn't even using this one anymore. So this is something I like to do. And then you can see in the outro, I have quite a bit of automation here because I really wanted to create a vibe. I'll actually play this part for you if it'll let me. Ugh. System overload. That's a Mac for you. Unbelievable. Okay, so those are just some high and low shelf cut that I did in the EQ. This is the high shelf frequency cut. So I was basically, you know, just doing a high shelf that I wanted to automate to be more and less extreme. Same with the low shelf. So it kind of just like that, you know? And I also needed to do a bypass for that EQ. I felt like I probably didn't need to, but made me feel better to do it. And then I also did a low cut frequency. So these are actually just EQ automations, but I did them differently for each part of the outro. Yeah, so in the end, I felt like it created the exact vibe I wanted without needing like another plugin to do something that the first one could have done if I just had more control over the situation in that way. So as you can see, I did this quite a lot in this project. Like this right here is a reverb automation. I believe that's what's on 10. Let's see. I think it was reverb. Let's find out. Let me go here. Yeah, chromoverb. Not great for everything, but okay for like little instrumental pieces. It's the Logic stock reverb. It's actually not bad. I mean, you know, I'll say this for Logic. Their strings and their chromoverb, they did okay with that. Also, the Drum Machine Designer, which is a recent addition to Logic, is really good. So, and then this is just a low cut and a high cut frequency again right here. You can kind of probably visualize what this would feel like going in from 20,000 hertz all the way down to like 945 and then back up again. Yeah, it was a cool effect. I don't know if it'll let me play it because this. So if I go here, you might actually be able to see it happen if it's my top EQ. See if I can open this up. And we can visualize it. Okay, watch the EQ. See it doing that on its own? That's automation. That's how you create stuff like that. Look, can it be done another way? I mean, yeah, but it wouldn't be just one way. It'd be like 15 different steps to get that effect. And honestly, it would probably have a lot more opportunities for error and for mishap, and it may not even sound exactly that fluid in the end anyway. So just automation is just the way to go. I know it looks intimidating, but I encourage you guys to try it, because once you do it like twice, it'll never be complex to you again. It's just not hard. So yeah, give it a shot, you know? Don't be afraid to try something that's going to massively improve your workflow and give you more opportunity to be creative instead of constantly doing tedious technical stuff. So that was the Chrysalis beat. I'm going to play it for you in full here in a minute, but I just want to say thank you for watching this behind the beat video. Happy New Year to everyone. I have a new song coming out at the end of February. I'm really excited about it. I'm going to do a making the beat video for that beat too. I sampled some actual vinyl from that, and it came out really good. So I'm excited to show everybody. And yeah, I hope that everybody is having a great 2024 so far. We're going to make this a great year. So I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye. Oh, controls locked. What the fuck?